Imagine if I told you that one morning when I got up and glanced out my window, I saw a full-fledged wedding taking place in my barn, one that I had no knowledge of, approval of, and most definitely had no intention of hosting, because that's precisely what took place. I consider myself to be a reasonable man, but there's something that truly tries your tolerance when you wake up to the sound of violins, champagne glasses clinking, and the whole cast of an expensive bridal magazine intruding on your property. My barn, my old, hard-working, never-bothered anyone barn, had been turned into something straight out of a Pinterest fever dream. There I stood in my bedroom, coffee mug in one hand, and incredulous in the other, looking out my window at a scene that defied logic. Rows of chairs sat neatly facing an altar, white draperies draped from the rafters, and fairy lights twinkled like a low-budget Hallmark film. In front of a stage, a flower-adorned arch stood, and a priest was fiddling with his microphone, as if he were going to bless the circus. Furthermore, nobody had thought to ask me if they were allowed to use my fucking barn. Now, I don't overreact as a man. However, since I'm a shotgun owner, I reasoned that I should probably go resolve this before it became too personal. With my dog racing next to me, ears pricked up as if he could already smell the foolishness developing in the air, I threw on my boots, picked up my hat, and stormed outside. The first individual with whom I made eye contact? Clarissa. Clarissa. Oh, Clarissa would be the person the universe would choose to embody the worst traits of every HOA president. The woman who once fined me for keeping my truck parked too ruggedly in my own driveway was the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood. The same woman who, after adorning her front door with more lights than a casino in Vegas, previously attempted to impose a rule that all holiday decorations must be subtle and tasteful, which was a rich move. And now, she had apparently decided that my barn was hers. I yelled, "Clarissa," in a dangerously composed tone. "What the hell is this?" She turned and gave me a phony smile that could pass for genuineness from a car salesperson. With a well-groomed hand, she sung, "Oh, Jake, good morning. Isn't it just beautiful? We really transformed this place, didn't we?" she asked. I took a step forward, blinking. We? I don't remember being part of any we, because if I had been, I would have told you that you're out of your damn mind. Clarissa laughed softly, the way kind people like her do when they're ready to say something really annoying. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, it's just a wedding," she replied. "And it's for my daughter, Lauren. You remember Lauren, don't you?" "Yes, Lauren, the first C." Lauren was yelling at a barista when I last saw her because they were out of oat milk. I rubbed my temple and said, "Clarissa, you didn't ask me." As though I were the one who was being unreasonable, she reprimanded Jake, saying, "Oh, don't be selfish," adding that everyone must occasionally make sacrifices for the good of the community. I nodded slowly and said again, "Sacrifices. Clarissa, you're hosting a full-fledged wedding in my barn." "Well, technically, it's not really yours," she remarked, cocking her head, "because this barn is under the HOA's jurisdiction, which oversees all properties." I inhaled deeply and made my jaw so tightened that my dentist could definitely feel it from across town. "Clarissa," I responded, "I own this barn. I pay taxes on this barn. The HOA does not own my land." She laughed. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Besides, it's already set up," she replied. "What do you want me to do? Cancel my daughter's wedding? Do you know how much this cost?" I took a look around. Final touches were being added by the decorators. Elegant tiny canapes were being placed out by the caterers. Already arriving visitors wore expensive cocktail dresses and stylish suits. For months, Clarissa had been planning this, and she had never once considered asking me. I firmly responded, "I want you to pack it all up and leave." Clarissa let out a gasp, as if I had just informed her that I was about to kick a puppy. "Jake, be reasonable. It's just one day, one beautiful, magical day," she said. "You don't even use this barn for anything important." I squinted. "I use it to store hay and also my bulls." Clarissa dismissively waved a hand. "Oh, don't worry. We moved all that stuff out this morning. Everything's in your field." I looked in the direction of the meadow, and sure enough, my neatly piled bales of hay were suddenly strewn all over the field as if someone had played Jenga while intoxicated. Some of my equipment was simply sitting in the sun, and my toolboxes were left open. However, what truly drew my eye? Mayhem and Thor, my nonsense. Like two enormous, enraged bouncers, they stood at the far end of the pasture, gazing toward the barn. They didn't like change, which is why they appeared agitated. They also undoubtedly disliked strangers. I took a deep breath, resisting the need to go all nuclear. I answered softly, "Clarissa, you are intruding." She gave an eye roll. "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud. No one's trespassing. Look, I even have permission." With a smug expression, she handed me a piece of paper that she had taken out of her ridiculously costly pocketbook. I looked down, and I almost burst out laughing. It was a printed HOA notice with a handwritten signature that appeared to have been written by a little child. I held it up and declared, "This is garbage, not a legal document." Clarissa folded her arms and sighed. "It's an official HOA approval." I gazed at her. "Clarissa, the HOA has no right to give away my barn." "Oh, stop making a fuss. Everything's already set up. It's too late to change anything now." I glanced at my bulls, then at her, then at the guests, and a gradual smile appeared on my face. "Fine," I replied. Clarissa blinked. "Excuse me? You're right," I replied. "It's already set up. I wouldn't want to ruin your daughter's big day." A smug, contented smile curved her lips. "Oh, I'm so glad you see reason, Jake. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go check on the caterers." Her confidence virtually oozed from every stride as I watched her turn and sashay away. I turned to face my bulls, who were still pacing close to the fence, and I decided something. Clarissa was going to have a wedding in my barn, if she so desired. She was going to get my bullshit, though. I backed away, unlatched the gate, and said just loud enough for them to hear, "Go. Introduce yourselves to the wedding guests." Have you ever witnessed an elegant wedding devolve into a full-scale stampede in less than 10 seconds? Because, believe me, chaos erupted the moment I opened that gate. There was absolutely no hesitation on the part of Thor and Mayhem. With their muscles rippling in the morning sun like wrath on four legs, they ran for the barn as soon as they knew they were free. Initially, no one took notice. The guests were too preoccupied with correcting their expensive attire, clinking champagne glasses, and oozing over the lavish floral arrangements. Instruments were being tuned by the band. The priest was likely praying for a simple ceremony while he leafed through his Bible. Thor then gave a snort, out, loud, deep, a sound that caused the hair on your arms to rise up and tremble in your chest. People began gazing at that point. It was just bewilderment at first. The audience began to murmur as a few heads turned. In the first row, an elderly woman squinted toward the pasture after adjusting her glasses. The first scream followed, because Mayhem and Thor were charging instead of just running, and they were on their way directly to the wedding. 1.5 seconds before complete pandemonium, there was hope for a fleeting, magnificent moment. I sincerely hope that these affluent guests would maintain their cool, understand that the bulls are not out for blood, and simply step aside to let my guys to explore their new environment. That hope vanished at once, because the entire occasion collapsed when Mayhem casually swung his enormous head to topple the champagne tower. The bride let out a shriek, as if attempting to decide which was the greater threat. The groom staggered backward, his gaze flitting between the bulls and his future mother-in-law. To his credit, the priest made an effort to maintain his professionalism, clutching his Bible as if it would protect him from 2-1 500-pound wrecking machines. The actual mayhem then broke out. The chairs turned over, tables fell over. A frozen facsimile of the bride's face skidded across the mud when the ice sculpture of Lauren and her soon-to-be husband, which most likely cost more than my entire truck, toppled over. As if their lives depended on it, people ran. Lauren too? Lauren attempted to flee as well, snatching up her expensive bridal gown, climbing it, and running for cover. Regretfully, no couture dress was ever created for evasive movements. Her heels snagged on the fabric after just 2 steps, launching her face first into the punch bowl. Her once immaculate locks were soaked and stuck to her face as she gasped and emerged covered in red liquid. Her arms extended like a monster from a horror film rising from the abyss. Her beloved fiancé, too, lost, not supporting her, not giving her a checkup, not even turning around. Like a man who had just come to terms with the fact that he wasn't ready for commitment, he was already running down the gravel road with his tie fluttering in the wind. To be honest, he couldn't be blamed. Thor and Mayhem, superb wedding coordinators Mayhem, meanwhile, had found the buffet table. And he was ecstatic, I tell you. A woman's designer garment was directly covered in a gravy explosion when the steaming chunk of meat fell straight onto it after he swung a whole roast beef platter into the air with a single head swipe. As if this were a battlefield, guests were yelling and jumping out of the path, and the band came next. Oh, how unfortunate the wedding band was. The lead singer, presumably hoping for a miracle, attempted to continue playing, plucking a wobbly, anxious rendition of a trite love ballad. He and Mayhem met eyes. The man was aware. He was aware. The drummer gave a high-pitched cry and dropped his drum kit right away, scurrying like a cat out of a bathtub onto the barn roof. As Mayhem charged through, shattering a bass guitar under his hoofs like it was an offering to the gods of destruction, the other members of the band abandoned their instruments and followed suit. Clarissa had finally grasped the situation by this time. The idea that her ideal wedding had just evolved into an episode of Animal Planet's when livestock attack left her speechless, her mouth expanding and shutting like a dying fish, presenting the meltdown of the HOA queen. Then again, she noticed me, and suddenly she had a target. She stomped at me through the whole chaos of what had once been a lovely wedding, her high-end heels squelching in the mixture of frosting, wine, and what I'm very certain was a trampled canapé. "You did this!" she growled as she jabbed a neatly manicured finger at my chest. I glanced around the catastrophe area and blinked at her. With real curiosity, I inquired, "Did what?" She screamed. "You let them out on purpose," in a voice that could only be heard by dogs. I gave a shrug. "Bulls have minds of their own, Clarissa." The first replied. "All I did was open a gate." Her eyes twitched with sheer anger as she sputtered, "You're going to pay for this. The damages. The emotional distress. Everything. I'll sue you." I grinned. I took out my phone. "Actually, Clarissa," the first replied, "I was thinking of pressing charges myself. You know, for trespassing, destruction of property, unauthorized use of my land." I swiveled the screen of my phone in her direction. The recording had already begun. All of them unmarried. Second, the whole wedding. The day she came clean about occupying my barn without my consent. The very moment my bulls came on the scene, her gaze expanded. "You wouldn't dare," she said. I grinned. "Try me." Clarissa appeared truly terrified for the first time since the beginning of this whole situation. She started to speak, most likely to make some feeble justification, but before she could say anything, Mayhem looked at us because he was tired of the smorgasbord. With a snort of satisfaction, he lowered his head and charged. In order to avoid being ran over, Clarissa had to jump headfirst into the ornamental bridal fountain before she could even scream. As she arose, sputtering and writhing like a wet, angry sea creature, water exploded in all directions. I could have left at that point. I had the option to abandon her there, drenched, degraded, and defeated. Instead, I leaned over the fountain, gazed down at her, and grinned as broadly as I had ever smiled, saying, "Hope you enjoyed the venue, because this is the last event you'll ever have here." I nodded in satisfaction and turned to leave. Clarissa, in the wreckage of her ideal wedding, she was left soaking, angry, and completely stunned. Clarissa remained seated in the water feature, wet, embarrassed. It appears to be an extremely costly shipwreck, The wedding had officially collapsed into mayhem all around us. The visitors lost, clutching their high-end handbags and yelling like extras in a low-budget disaster film. The intelligent ones had fled as soon as Thor and mayhem appeared. The less intelligent ones had tried to hide behind overturned tables, beneath chairs, or behind bushes because, well, if a 1,500-pound bull decides you're in his way, that's going to stop him. Don't worry, it didn't. The once sophisticated wedding location, it appeared to be a battleground. They switched places. Plates broke. It looked more like a crime scene on a horticultural show than wedding decor because the flower arrangements had been trodden into the ground. Lauren, too? She was still seated in the ground, her dress destroyed, her face dripping with makeup as if she had just made it through the last scene of a scary movie. Her ex-fiancé? Not a trace. He was hurling fences as if his life depended on it when I last saw him, which, to be honest, it most likely did. Clarissa, too. Clarissa was furious. Water poured off her fancy dress in melancholy tiny streams as I watched her drag herself out of the fountain. Her formerly flawlessly groomed hair now draped about her face in damp bunches. Her anger was leaking out of her. Then she looked me in the eye. Boy, oh boy. Clarissa loses. Her pricey gown stuck to her legs like a tragic mermaid costume as she strode toward me, heels squelching in the wet ground. She growled, "You think this is funny? This is the funniest thing that has ever happened to me," I murmured, stroking my chin. I was afraid her veneers could break because of how tightly her mouth was clenched. She shouted, You ruined this wedding," and threw an arm at the chaos all around us. I folded my arms. "You stole my barn, you trespassed on my land, you moved my belongings, and you threw a full-fledged wedding without asking. I just let nature take its course," I replied, indicating toward my now empty bull enclosure, given that she was already muddy, saturated, and covered with pieces of wedding cake. Her face, turning crimson, only served to heighten the impression of a woman losing everything in real time. "I will sue you for this. The damages, the emotional distress, everything. You are going to pay," she snarled, gesturing with a trembling finger at me. I grinned. I took out my phone. "Actually, Clarissa," the first replied, "I was thinking of pressing charges myself. For trespassing, destruction of property, unauthorized use of my land." I then turned the TV in her direction with the largest grin I've ever had. The recording had already begun. Her gaze expanded, because the whole catastrophe was there, as obvious as day, from her arrogant, cocky smile at the start to her acknowledging on camera that she had occupied my barn without my consent to the precise moment my bulls arrived. "You wouldn't dare," she said. I smiled more broadly. "Try me." Then sirens. Oh, it simply got better and better. The police show up, the other visitors froze. As if they could somehow slip out before things worsened, those who had foolishly stayed behind began whispering excuses and slowly making their way toward the parking lot. It's too late. Claria's nightmare reached its climax when 2 patrol cars arrived, throwing up dust. With a tired sigh that only those who were accustomed to suburban nonsense could muster, the officers emerged to see the debris. Among them, Deputy Owens. For years, I had known Owens. He had witnessed a few things, but this even for him. This was novel. He studied the landscape in front of him for a long time. The tables were overturned. The weeping bride, Clarissa, extremely angry and very wet, still perched on the barn roof. The wedding band would not leave. And lastly, me, standing serenely, like the hurricane's eye beside the barn door. He rubbed his temples and let out a breath. He said, "Jake," with a voice full of bone-crushing fatigue, "What the hell happened here?" I grinned. I turned my phone over, then pressed play. Reality versus Clarissa. Owens observed. "My barn is being stolen by Clarissa. She boasted about it. When I protested, she laughed in my face. Then, the bulls, the mayhem, devastation." He shook his head, and ran a hand down his face as the video came to a close, looking like a man who had just realized he would be writing a lengthy report tonight. "So let me get this straight," he began, glancing at Clarissa. "You threw a wedding on private property. Without permission?" Still soaked, Clarissa tried to gather herself. She lifted her chin and said, "This is a misunderstanding. I had full approval from the HOA. Owens looked at me. "Does the HOA have any legal authority over your land?" I gave a headshake. "Nope." Owens looked at Clarissa once more. He took out his notepad and said, "Well, that's a problem." The color faded from Clarissa's face. "You can't be serious," she remarked, her voice suddenly much less certain. Ignoring her, Owens opened his notebook. "Unauthorized use of private property," he stated. "Trespassing, destruction of property, falsifying a HOA document." Clarissa laughed in a shrill voice. Wild-eyed now, she yelled, "Oh, come on. This is absurd. No damage was done." Owens turned slowly, surveying the damage. The wedding that failed, the broken ornaments in the distance. The scared visitors were still trembling. The barn roof still held the wedding band. Then Lauren, still soaked in punch, sitting in the mud, whispering to herself about signs from the universe. "No harm, huh?" said Owens. Clarissa stumbled. She pointed a trembling finger at me and said, "Jake intentionally let those bulls out. Arrest him." Owens gave me a glance. "That true?" I gave a shrug. "Bulls have minds of their own, Deputy," I replied. "All I did was open a gate." Owens let out the most profound sigh in recorded human history, then faced Clarissa once more. "Well," he replied, "you're gonna have to come with us." Clarissa's head jerked upwards. "Excuse me? You trespassed?" Owens stated. "You hosted an unauthorized event on private property, and you caused significant damages." With cuffs readied, the other cop moved forward. And suddenly, officially, Clarissa was taken into custody. Clarissa had left. Standing with my arms crossed, I watched as the patrol car drove away, taking her to face the consequences of her offenses against basic human decency, common sense, and personal property. The remaining visitors, who hadn't already left in total horror, saw this as permission to creep off into the night. They ran to their cars, kicked off their luxury shoes, and pulled out of my driveway like they had just escaped a hostage situation, muttering half-hearted apologies. Lauren? She was still sitting in the mud, covered in sorrow, punch, and the heartbreaking knowledge that her wedding, and perhaps her relationship as a whole, was in ruins. Her ex-fiancé had long since left, most likely already phoning an Uber from the next town. To be honest, he couldn't be blamed. The morning following the end of the world, my barn appeared to be the scene of a reality TV show disaster. By the time the sun rose the following morning, broken wine glasses, crumpled decorations, and a whole table turned upside down like a piece of contemporary art. Thor's midnight snack left the remains of a once glorious roast beef plate, half eaten in the ground. The sculpture made of ice? Well, it had melted throughout the course of the night, leaving behind a distorted, eerie puddle that still vaguely looked like a very unhappy bride. Like a melancholy, spectral cautionary tale to upcoming wedding planners, Lauren's abandoned veil dangled from a fence post. Clarissa too? Yes, she was definitely not finished with me yet. Before I had even had my morning coffee, the texts began to come in. "Clarissa, you're going to need a lawyer, so I hope you have a decent one. Clarissa, you backwoods PSYCO, I'll sue you for every penny you own. Do you know who I am, Clarissa?" I didn't answer, of course. However, I did take a screenshot of everything in case she wanted to add harassment to her list of bad choices for the week. The best thing, though, I didn't need to take any action because the internet was busy dismantling Clarissa while she was busy threatening me. How to unintentionally become viral. You see, I had posted the tape of the wedding fiasco the previous evening just for my own entertainment. Perhaps some locals would enjoy it, I thought. However, the internet adored it. It became viral in a matter of hours. Not a few thousand views viral, but viral on the main page of Reddit, trending on Twitter, and making late night talk show jokes. Here are a few of my favorite remarks. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Release the wedding bowl should be a legally protected right. I would pay actual money to see Clarissa's face when she realized she was being recorded. The way Lauren's dress was worth more than my car but couldn't save her from a full-body punch bowl baptism. Art. This story has everything: entitlement, bulls, a runaway groom, 10 tenths, no notes. News organizations began to report on it. It was causing influencers to respond. The entire event was even reenacted by a late-night program host, replete with actors portraying mayhem and Thor. When it eventually made it into the local press, I framed the newspaper headline, "Bulls Crash Wedding in HOA Power Play Gone Wrong." Legendary. Clarissa's decline in authority. You would think that at this point, Clarissa would simply concede the defeat, keep quiet, perhaps go to a different state and adopt a new persona. However, no, she attempted to portray herself as the victim instead. Speaking out on local Facebook groups, she claimed that I had attacked her family with livestock and that she was taking legal action to protect her rights as a HOA president. Except, there are two main issues with that plan. The entire internet now knew that the HOA had no control whatsoever over my property. The video of her trespassing, gloating, and then diving bombing into a fountain to get away from a bull had been viewed by everyone on the planet. The HOA board suddenly turned against her. Within the week, she was compelled to step down. No more Clarissa. There will be no more penalties for rugged truck parking. No more absurd HOA regulations. Simply peaceful, unbroken rural life. Just the way I loved it. Last words. I was feeling incredibly calm a few days later as I sipped my coffee and watched the sunset from my veranda, unaware that they had become internet legends. Thor and Mayhem stood in the field, content and at ease. I silently raised my mug in toast to fairness, to bulls who comprehend the task, and to Clarissa wherever she may be, hopefully thinking back on her decisions and avoiding my barn at all costs. Because there was one certainty: this was a stunt she will never do again. The end. And that's how I became an internet celebrity. My friend, a wedding, a tyrannical HOA, and two bulls. Would I repeat it? Of course. However, I might bring popcorn the next time.